UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomenon. Are they extraterrestrial, interdimensional, time travelers in origin, or are they simply a result of top-secret military projects, false flag alien invasions, PSYOP, drones, or other human-made aircraft? Join the discussion now on UAP Crossfire.
Well, good evening, greatest audience on the planet. It is a pleasure to be with you tonight on UAP Crossfire, KGRA DB, worldwide interweb of things, broadcasting the show on our great sphere. I have great hosts with me tonight. I always get to the jam at the end of the show, so my traditional closing when I host and when I do my shows, God's peace, just surpassing all understanding and knowledge, I wish to all of you. We got a lot of great stuff tonight. I have a couple housekeeping things before I jump in and start hassling it with my co-hosts. I had the privilege to be on ERRT Radio with Ron. Ron is a friend of KGRA, knows our producer, Bill Skywatcher, for a number of years. And he asked me to come on last week. Had a wonderful time on his show. Ron is the only host that I know, because of the late hour that I was going to be on the show for our time zone change, kept sending me messages that I was getting proper rest and nutrition before I came onto his show. He didn't want me to crash, I guess, on the show. So I thought that was very, very sweet. We had a great time. Also, I'd like to throw a quick word out, the passing of Willie Mays. Arguably in the top 5, if not top 3 of professional baseball players of all time. Small family connection. My father's dad, my grandfather, was a huge fan of the New York Giants when they were the New York Giants. Had some connection with the team. I'm not sure what he did. And in our many mementos is a birthday telegram from Willie Mays to my grandfather. So quite a man. I remember seeing him play as a kid. That's how old I am. But I do remember him when he was still playing. And Donald Sutherland. And in the honor of Donald Sutherland, I'd just like to say, no negative waves, Moriarty. We're all positive waves tonight. We're going to go with the positive waves tonight. With that said, let's start with Don Ecker, who understands and appreciates the positive waves. How are you tonight, sir?
Doing well, my friend, doing very well. It's been absolutely gorgeous out here in sunny Southern California, weather-wise. And I got to say, back when I moved down here to be with my lady, I had a feeling that I was going to love the weather coming from back east, where we have cold, snowy winters. And I was not wrong. So there you go.
Well, I want everyone to that's in the audience to remember these remarks so that when we hear the wildfires, mudslides, the insanity of La La Land, when all that sets in, that there was a moment.
What the hell was this? No negative waves? I just heard that in your cackle.
I want to balance it out when we get to that. You know, California is Sodom and Gomorrah thing that we get into at least a couple times out of the year. I mean, okay. Happy start to summer for the Northern Hemisphere and happy winter to our listeners in the southern half of the sphere. Happy start of winter. Chris, how are you tonight?
Doing great. You know, we're actually getting a little bit of a heat wave up here in Buffalo, New York. Kind of unusual, but the temperatures have been in the high 80s and 90s. And, you know, for the first time, it was too hot to go outdoors. So that's kind of a shock up in this area. Usually you're putting on a knit hat or something up here, but the weather's been sunny and beautiful. Can't complain.
Again, I will urge the audience to please note this so that we hear that the devil took a crap, I believe was the way that was described when the snow was up 2.5 stories. And you were using ladders and you and your wife had to go spelunking to find the mailbox. No problem finding the mailbox now. So
No.
yes, I'm as I turn to Mark. Good evening, Mark, and welcome to the show. It's the first time you and I have been on a show. Well, I guess we've been on a couple shows here together before, but it's great to see you, my friend. You are suffering the same kind of wonderful steam bath, I assume?
Yeah, it was 100 here today.
Yeah, that's the same thing. Yeah. Not too far up the mark up here in Southern Maine.
But like you say, enough of the negative waves, Moriarty.
Right, exactly.
Kelly's Heroes, one of the greatest movies ever.
I love that part with the tank. What are you doing? Drinking a little wine, eating some cheese, some rays. And the other part about that flick that I will, well, there's two things that I remember on that. And it's Kelly's Heroes, by the way, for those that are trying to catch up with us.
Telly Savalas, Don Rickles.
Oh, yeah, just a tremendous cast. I mean, just tremendous cast. Yeah. But when they had the Western, when it was that whole homage, slap happiness, when the Germans and Kelly's Heroes, they're in front of the bank and they play the wah-ha-ha, and they start pulling back their uniform, fatigue jackets, and they're exposing their 45 911s and the Luger and the whole routine. And then they realize that they're going to split the gold. That's what the whole thing is. And the German smiles and Don Rickles, the other line with Don Rickles, business is business.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Speaking about business is business, is it just me? But in the news, as I titled the show this week, is there an uptick in the prevailing theory that the aliens, the extraterrestrial aliens, those that were not part of this planet originally, I don't even know what you call ET offspring. We'll get into that some other time. Some kind of a dreamer, I guess. And I don't mean to offend anybody. I just don't know what that term is yet. Well, I'm sure we'll find out. But do we have an uptick in the news on UFOs are explained? In fact, I have an article on the other computer that just came up before we came to the show. UFOs are explained by extraterrestrials are here, they're among us, and they're operating. And since, Mark, you are our newest and youngest member, freshman Mark D'Antonio.
I'm fresh.
What do you have to say, sir?
Well, look at when you have Harvard analysts and professors saying that they may be here among us. Well, the reasons they say that comes from a scientific basis. They're not just looking at UFO reports and saying, oh, they must be here. No, they're basing it on other things, kind of like what I wrote in my book, and that's the carbon-based life. Okay, that's probably the primary motivator for life, and if that makes me a carbon bigot, so be it. Okay, and so
I'm writing that down for the emails. That
Fair enough.
Thank you.
And
carbon bigotry.
I'm a carbon bigot. That's right. I think that there's life in the universe, and it's mostly carbon. I don't see any other potential in the periodic table.
So you don't prescribe to the silicon as
no.
Awesome.
As a matter of fact, when you look at the columns in the periodic table, you have carbon, and below you have silicon. Those columns represent the most like element to the element above.
Right.
Okay. So silicon is the most like carbon in its potential capability, but you can't do anything with silicon. I mean, you can. Silicon makes very, very, very tough bonds. It doesn't like to be broken apart. It's not flexible like carbon. Yeah.
Don, I don't want this going any place but off the scientific thing, what you can do with silicon. I know what you're thinking. You're out in California, so stop that right now. Go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
You saw that look on his face, did you?
I knew where this was going.
Yeah,
Positive waves, positive energy.
Yeah, come on, Moriarty. Yeah. No. So, but the thing was, the silicon makes these really robust bonds with its elements, right? With the other elements. Like when you walk on the beach, you're walking on 2 parts gas, 1 part silicon dioxide. There's 2 oxygen atoms in there. So you can say to all your friends, hey, we're on the beach. We're walking on mostly gas. And people look at you funny, like, what? But you're absolutely right. By count, you're walking on mostly gas. But the point being, silicon doesn't like to be broken apart. Carbon makes and breaks bonds very easily. That's kind of almost like what it was designed for. Notice I said design.
Right.
There's going to be an element in the periodic table that will outshine all the others, and that element is carbon. It's the 4th most abundant element in the entire universe.
Well, I can tell you, going to LA, I have seen a lot of silicon life forms. right here in sunny Southern California.
I'm sure you have. Augmentation life forms, I'm sure. Yeah.
So it seems like almost a hybrid situation, but we'll get to that in a second, John.
That's actually good. He's right.
So
yeah.
back to your thoughts that this is not sensational, that this is based on scientific inquiry and conclusion. What's changed? Why are we seeing so much of it now? I don't think that in the last 6 months there's been some breakthrough. I would think that these kind of attitudes have probably been prevailing for a while.
Yeah, they've been percolating, but there have been some breakthroughs, which I'll speak to if you want. If you go to the Large Hadron Collider overseas at CERN, right, they've added a detector to the Large Hadron Collider called ATLAS. The detector is ATLAS, ATLAS. And the ATLAS detector is being used to look for a specific type of particle that shows a lot of promise, potentially in the interplanetary travel arena, and that is something called a Kaluza-Klein graviton. They're looking for gravitons. We know that everything in the periodic table, everything in the four atomic forces, the strong, weak, electromagnetic, and gravity, those four fundamental forces, they can all be described with both a particle, like an electron, and a wave describing the probability of where the electron will be. Okay, they can all have these probabilistic determinations, and they can all be described as particles. Gravity is the only weirdo. We only see it has waves. We don't see that there's actually gravity particles, but that's what they're looking for because they're theorized to exist. And I think I know where they are. So does my friend Bob Schroeder, who'd be an excellent guest in this program, by the way. Okay. And his book, which I have right here, is Solving the UFO Enigma, talks about fifth dimensional travel and dimensional travel. And Bob's not the only guy talking about this. I'm talking about it. Other physicists are talking about it. Other astrophysicists are talking about it. Avi Loeb, not too long ago, actually in the last couple of weeks, said something like that he believes that alien life is traveling interdimensionally as well. So we're moving toward this potential interdimensionality because of the fact that when we're looking at interdimensional travel, we're considering that we've got no other way for alien beings to get here in any reasonable amount of time.
Right.
They'd have to use this interdimensionality, which means they go from point A to point B without traveling the distance from point A to point B. So imagine walking from your chair to the door to leave your house, not by walking across the floor, but by leaving your chair and appearing at your door. Now, that makes no sense to us. It sounds like wacky science fiction, but it's not. And that's kind of where I'll leave that, because actually I've been lecturing around the country on this particular thing, and I'm doing a lecture this Sunday on it, and it's actually getting some pretty wide acclaim and attraction because people see how this might actually work. And it makes sense because it's literally the only way they can be here from there. There's no generation ships. They're not traveling for thousands of years to get here. They're traveling for maybe hundreds of minutes, because from here to Alpha Centauri is 10 to 12,000 years at the fastest speed we can go now with our chemical rockets. Do it this other way, and using these Kaluza-Klein gravitons, it's a 20-minute trip. Okay, and that's a Stanford professor, a physicist, saying that. So there's a lot of traction. So this is the kind of thing that's now fueling this uptick in the believability of it, not only aliens being here, because that's the big sticking point, right? Everybody knows, right? You all know. We all believe there's life out there. Every astronomer I know believes there's life out there. Every astrophysicist, every cosmologist. However, what they don't believe is that they're necessarily here.
Right.
And this is a way they can be here.
All right. Hang there real tight. You did make me think about something really funny, though. I just saw that the guys there at the Boom guys that are making the new supersonic airplane, their PR ad is that when they get this plane flying, anywhere on the globe in 2 hours is what they want to do, and they want the ticket price to be $100.
Doesn't that sound great?
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I'm an aviator through and through, but I'd really like to try the folding time and space thing. That seems like to be pretty exciting.
Yeah,
All
you
right.
wouldn't feel any forces. It would feel like you're sitting in your chair right now. You wouldn't feel anything.
Exactly, and that's what I think is going on the Tic Tac. But we'll save that for a little bit.
Right.
Don, how are you tonight?
Just fine.
Now, give me your take.
But I
Go ahead.
that's what I'm about to do. I happen to be somebody that believes that they have been here, the visitors, extraterrestrials, however you want to slice and dice it, for at least 400,000 years.
I agree with
And
that.
I think those first visitors came here with a purpose. And because what they were doing was so labor intensive, that they decided through their advanced science and genetics and being able to manipulate things like DNA, that they took our earliest ancestors and they tinkered with them, and voila, here we are, Homo sapiens sapiens. I believe initially that the human race was built specifically to be a slave labor race. And there were a lot of political things happening within the group of visitors that came here. There were those who were pro and those who were con human beings. Now, where's all this coming from? Well, a lot of it is coming from the research that a very dear and now unfortunately departed friend of mine, Zachariah Sitchin, wrote about extensively, because he basically learned to decipher the earliest known civilization, their writings, and he traveled all over the world doing it, found traces of them even here in the Americas. And I'm talking about, of course, Sumeria, ancient Sumeria, that today encompasses the lands of Iraq, Syria, parts of Turkey, because at that time, over, well, at least 6 millennia, probably longer than that, those people were there. Now, obviously, the next question that pops up, where in the heck did they come from? Well, we go back a little further to something that just happened within the last 25, 30 years with the discovery of sites like Göbekli Tepe. Human beings created a magnificent amount of architecture there. For what reason, we're not sure. The research seems to indicate it was a commemoration of a terrible catastrophic event that happened here on planet Earth roughly 12,006 or 800 years ago, with the advent of what became known as the Younger Dryas event. Astronomical objects impacted the Earth, caused the ice sheets to melt and recede. But what was there before the ice sheets? And there lies the rub with most of mainstream science and archaeology. I happen to believe, with a lot of good reason, I think, that there were advanced human civilizations. Now, when I say advanced, I'm not necessarily talking about electronics and jet airplanes and atomic weapons or anything like that, but they were apparently extremely advanced to the point where they were able to travel worldwide in their ships, their vessels, okay, their sailing vessels, created astounding maps, and even found places that we didn't officially discover until 1820. And I'm talking about the Antarctic. And there is and I don't want to get off into a rant here.
No, I won't let you.
There is another area, okay, that is extraordinarily mysterious and restricted by the powers that be. As a citizen, you cannot go down there. and as you well know, Cobra, and travel
But
willy-nilly wherever you want to.
No, you can't travel
In Antarctica.
willy-nilly, but you can go there on a cruise ship. It's just prohibitively expensive to do
And
so.
you can fly there from New Zealand.
And you can fly there.
My point is you can't go inland and do any exploring or research or even fly over.
It's not a hospitable place to do that. But I
It's like being on
understand the point
Mars.
you're making. It's a very strange alliance of the countries and the governments of the world. And Antarctica is, in my opinion, in peril because now the technology exists to extract minerals and precious resources underneath, and they will destroy that continent if given the opportunity.
Let's not forget what Buzz Aldrin said, who was down there.
He was at McMurdo. I know. I stood where he stood. Out of there. Say again, sir?
He came back and purportedly said that place is evil down there.
Right.
Now he didn't extrapolate what he was talking about, but something he either witnessed or something he was told freaked the man out. Okay. And he was kind of a strange duck anyway. I met him.
We shouldn't speak of him in the past tense. He's still with us. He's one of my favorite people. All right. Hold on a second, Don. Chris.
You asked.
Well, first of all, I think what Mark has been saying about the scientific aspect of it is very fascinating. And I would encourage anybody to go listen to one of his lectures because I was absolutely amazed at what he was talking about.
But
I'm not a scientist.
It's very entertaining. He's very entertaining. He has the science, very good. And he has the personality.
Yeah,
he's got the teeth too, that come out every now and then too. But
But what I do is, because I don't have the scientific training, but I do have the investigative training, what I like to do is to watch these experts and read their body language and read how they talk and how they explain, and then watch them again and see if they embellish or change their story and see what there is. And I'm finding that the scientists that I've listened to, these Harvard professors and some of the others, they're not embellishing. Now, in the UFO field, I've said this hundreds of times, we have people in this field that are frauds. They're hoaxers, and they're just, they hurt the ufology field.
Yeah.
But when you get some scientific people like this, and you watch, and they're very straightforward, they're almost aggressive what they're saying because they want people to understand what they're saying. So they don't sit back and talk this. They lean into this and they say, hey, they're here. They're walking among us. There's species out there that look just like us. And we have seen this over and over and over again of diplomats, people in political positions, and now scientists coming out and saying this. Now, I will agree with Admiral Trudeau. I think it's his name, Tim Trudeau, who was on there. There's got to be a spiritual component to this. What I don't know, but I do believe, I heard him say that there is a spiritual component to this. And, he's a person that believes in God and a spiritual type of being. And I have to agree with him there because my philosophy is that, well, God made us, but, he didn't exactly have to stop with us because the universe is so vast, he could have gone to other places. So you have to try to draw in that spiritual aspect of this and try to put
Chris,
it in
let me ask you this, Chris.
Sure.
If you take Don's belief that entities came here, they're building a slave race, and in that is a group that says, nope, there is something special about these creatures. We shouldn't enslave them. Then you have the other half. Does that fulfill the good and bad spiritual side of this discussion? Does it set up the mythology and the legends, and then it becomes part of the mythos of us?
No, not really. Because remember, throughout our history, slavery has always been in each type.
I'm asking about the aspect of spirituality.
I know that, but let me get to that. So what Don is saying is that they came here and developed us. If I'm correct, right, Don?
Yes.
Okay. I don't, that part I'm not sure about. I can't wrap my head around that. I believe we were here and we may have been formed into a slave labor. but I don't think that they created us solely for that content. Now, they could have used us for that content. They could have enhanced us for that content. That is still open for me to find out. So I kind of acknowledge me. However, I'm not sure if they actually came here and said, "Well, let's create this being." Because think about this: we're not, if for slave labor, we're not really that good. We only got 2 arms. Why didn't they make us with 4 arms, 6 legs?
I don't
Something
know.
that's,
You look at the pyramids.
yeah. But I mean,
There's
if you're
pretty
going
good
to create,
evidence that you get a good union and a good union boss, you can get things done.
all right. But if you're going to make a slave force, right? You're going to make them as efficient, especially if you have the technology to do that. Why would you make us? Because our backs aren't really that strong. We don't last a long time. Why not make us more proficient? And I don't think we see that. Now, go ahead and attack my argument with that. But I would say that if these people are so brilliant, which I do agree with Don, he's saying that the Anunnakis came down. Why didn't they make us more proficient to do?
Well, I'm going to let
stuff
Don
that they-
answer, but I think what Don said is that indigenous species was altered, was perfected. So you have limits to how far you're going to take something. You have something that's going to have to work within the environment that you have, and you want a certain life cycle out of it. You want a certain reproductive kind of thing out of it. The thing I was driving at is, okay, I agree that it smacks in some areas that makes people really squirmy a little bit, but there does seem to have an interesting aspect to me when you talk about the spiritual side. And if you bring the spiritual side in, where there's light, there's dark. Where there's dark, there's light. And I picked up on Don. He said this a number of times, and I love talking about Don in the third person while he's here, and he just starts to get that grimace. He doesn't do he doesn't do well when I do that, but I'll let him jump in. I just think it has an interesting place.
Let me just get this one point out. If and I want to just say that if they're so brilliant, and they probably are, these species that came down, and they probably did use slave labor. I just can't see, if they were that brilliant that they genetically wanted to make us, why they didn't make us more proficient and better than what we were. It just doesn't. I can't wrap my mind around that part. That's where I disagree with Don.
Don, jump in.
Okay, as far as not being as proficient as Chris said, that may have been a deliberate design flaw. This is speculation.
No, I see you doing.
Obviously, I don't know for sure, but maybe they gave us deliberately an expiration date. Okay, why would they do that? Well, let's take a look at the history of the human race. Doesn't matter where you are, what today is Russia, what today is China, what today is Central America. Humans have had one capability that they demonstrate continuously, and that's the capacity for violence and warfare. Now, if you follow and if you're familiar with the ancient history that I'm referring to, coming out of Samaria, each of those city-states, okay, 7,000 years ago, each city, which was its own individual country, if you will,
Sure,
had their own patron gods or goddesses, all right? Enlil, Enki. I'm trying to think of some of the other gods and goddesses, Marduk. And they were often, according to the writings, at odds with each other. Enlil was given, according to the ancient writings, the sponsorship of the earth. And Enki was the guy that they kind of sent off into the hinterlands. Now, what the hell were they doing here originally? Well, if you believe the mythologies as they're written, the ancient history and mythologies today, they came here specifically for minerals. Their planet was facing an ecology disaster. And one of the things that they wanted to do was mine prodigious amounts of gold. Why? They wanted to release the gold into their atmosphere. Now, there is some scientific basis to that because this would reflect away. I don't know what all the analysis dealing with this is, but it was to help their climate. The sun, as it's shown on their planet, it was filled with pollution, etc. Well, okay, that's possible, I guess. But what is actual historical fact is the fact that in South Africa, ancient gold mines going back over 300,000 years was discovered. 300,000 or more years ago, somebody was mining gold in South Africa. What for? What possible use is gold? You can't use it to make tools. You can't use it to make weapons. It's too soft. At that time, there was no economic system that we're aware of. So what the hell would it have been for? Well, if you believe Sitchin's translations, that's why it was being mined. Now, each of those gods and goddesses I talked about that were at odds with each other basically presented themselves to their human groups as gods or goddesses. The humans worshiped them. And if they got into the gods or goddesses got into a real squabble, what did they do? They directed their human servants to go to war with the other human servants. And Sumerian cities were at odds with each other all the time, continuous fighting and warfare. So, I think, Chris, now Enlil, the chief god, was the one that didn't care much for humanity. As a matter of fact, when they discovered that something was going to happen which caused the Great Flood, okay, he was happy about that. He was happy. Let's get rid of those pesky human beings. Enki, on the other hand, was much more disposed toward humans as their benefactor and friend, and he warned certain of them. And that's where the original story of the ark saving animal species and human beings, etc., came from. Now, one other thing, and I'm going to shut up. If you go back to your Bible, especially in the Old Testament, the first couple of books of the Bible, much of that, if not most of it, is taken directly from Sumerian mythology, the story of the ark. My God, Abraham, the father of the Jewish nation or the Hebrew nation, came from Ur, the city of Ur on the Chaldees River. So yeah, even Hebrew roots, which by the way, at that time, they used the word for the Hebrews, haparu, which meant wanderers, okay? They came out of Sumeria. So much of their history and their religion originally emanated from Sumeria. Now, I'm not going to go into this now, but there's a heck of a lot of reason to believe that the Old Testament God, who is distinctly different from the New Testament God, may have been one of those Anunnaki entities. But I'm just going to leave that there.
Excellent point. I've heard the same understanding for the Old Testament and Yahweh as termed in the Hebrew part of the Bible. I also wanted to note that since the Hajj is just completed, Abraham is also considered the founding leader and founder of Islam. And since we're just finished a high holiday for them, I didn't want to have them excluded. With that said, Mark, your reaction to what we talked about, and then I want you to segue into the second big thing that I've seen probably more articles about in the last 7 to 10 days than I have in the last 7 to 10 months. Dyson spheres and their connection with UFOs. Now, you're the only person on the planet right now that can explain it to the audience, but any take on what how we've...
Well, I'm the only person on the air at the moment, maybe, in this particular station. They can talk about it directly, but there's plenty. First of all, I wanted to go back to what Don said about the gold mining. Gold's a very heavy element, so you can't really aerosolize that and put it into the atmosphere without it stratifying out very quickly. It would fall to the ground very quickly. And there's not a whole lot of gold on the planet. You can't cover the whole Earth with gold. Gold comes from the collisions of neutron stars or merging.
I think to be clear, though, Don was saying that the mining was to go to another place. But
I thought he was saying were they taking the gold to their planet? Right. Is that what you're suggesting, Don?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right. Even so, we have such a pitifully small amount of gold, which explains why it's so valuable, because it's so rare. Same thing with diamonds. Diamonds are very rare, so they become comparatively more value when exposed to human civilization. Well, that's a pretty stone. It's so beautiful yellow. Where'd you get it? I found it in the gold panning for gold. As you were on ERT radio with Ronald. Ronald is actually a gold miner.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys talked about that, but
never
Ronald, on
air.
Okay, yeah, because he's a gold miner, not very successful, but a gold miner. So that said, the amount of gold they could get, they would have to go down toward the core of the Earth in order to get it. There's veins, sure, from stuff that got mixed into the molten planet's crust when it was first solidifying. But that's not where the bulk of it is. It's actually differentiated to the center. And there's plenty of it in the universe. They don't have to come here to get it. They could find it in many other places, much more prevalently. So I'm not sure about that. But, as far as the rest of what you were saying, Don, I can't tell you. I mean, I know Enki was a god of water. That's what I know. Yay. I can't tell you much about ancient Sumeria other than the script, that they wrote in and some of the meanings that has in ancient stuff. And now, as far as the second thing you were talking about, I'm
surprised you didn't slick that little Ghostbusters line in there. He was really big in ancient Sumeria, but that's okay. Go ahead. It needed to be thrown.
I think it was Bill Murray that said that.
Yes, it was Dr. Venkman. And you're a doctor of what? Well, of many disciplines.
Right, yeah. Many disciplines. Yeah. So as far as the Dyson sphere is an interesting construct. Tabitha Bayagian, an astronomer, actually was looking at some Kepler data and discovered a star that was fading over 100 years. It was dimming in a really strange way. And the thought had to be asked and had to be expanded upon. Was this a potential giant construction, right? A massive construction around the star. And the Dyson sphere concept, championed by Freeman Dyson, was that you surround your entire star with a sphere of material so you can capture every single bit of the star's energy. Now, that material would actually be your planet's surface, and it'd be surrounding the whole star. So you would actually be on a sphere. In the inside of that sphere, you'd have permanent daytime, obviously. Okay. On the outside, the star would seem to get dimmer and dimmer as this thing was being constructed, and when it was finally sealed off, you'd get nothing. The idea is to move into one of these levels of the Kardashev distinction, when it talks about the Kardashev scale for the I would say, development technologically and energy usage wise of a civilization. The more energy they can more efficiently use, the higher their Kardashev level. A Kardashev level 4 civilization might be able to travel between the stars with ease and possibly be intergalactic. Kardashev level 1, which we're about 300 years from, is a planet that can utilize most of the star's energy impacting their planet. It doesn't mean you have a Dyson sphere, but the concept of the Dyson sphere is in that Kardashev level 2 or 3, where civilization needs to get energy, because energy is what's going to drive their ability to mobilize and get out of the star systems they live in. So more energy means more ability to travel interstellar. So that said, a Dyson sphere would give them that energy, but that's a local thing. And so if we saw that happening at another star, that means that they're isolating themselves around their star, and they're not really necessarily traveling out interstellar. They could be, and using this property I was telling you about before with these Kaluza-Klein gravitons and propulsion, well, then that could possibly work, And there have been a lot of things I've seen that shows a tremendous overlap into what looks like it could be Kaluza-Klein gravitons, just the shape of a UFO being circular. They're particle accelerators. That's why they're circular, in my view, and they're generating these particles with the accelerator, like we're doing at the Large Hadron Collider, with many miles around the accelerator, because we can't make them that much smaller, right? But they figured out how to do them in about a 30-foot circle, all right? And thus, if they can generate these particles, then they can go long distances. So it's possible that if you're at the Kardashev scale position that would allow you to build a Dyson sphere around your star, you may also be interstellar using this particular technique. And as I said, it literally is the only way that they could be here with any kind of efficiency and time. So in other words, you could literally go to Alpha Centauri for the weekend and then come back. You could go to Pluto for lunch and be back by dinner. I'm not kidding. That's how this could actually work. And so with that kind of technology at your fingertips, then it means that you might also very necessarily have to have created a way to harness all the star's energy. So a Dyson sphere would be one way to do it. Another way to do it won't be a sphere, because there's no structure that we can see from a physics point of view and materials strength point of view that can withstand the kind of forces that would be imparted on it. So what you might have is what we'd rather call a Dyson swarm, kind of like a swarm of drones, but it's a swarm of satellites. And the satellites would take in energy from the star and beam it to one centralized location, maybe an orbiting platform around your planet, where this energy is stored and distributed to the planet's surface. That's more likely. But if you have enough of these swarm, population satellites out there, the star would be effectively seen to dim from our perspective, because it's going to be all around the star, not just in an orbit. It's probably going to be in all kinds of orbits around the star.
So how about going to a star as a generator? Maybe not necessarily the star that you're in your system that you're living at, but you find a good candidate. As I've read a little bit into this subject, they look for prime candidates that fit this. So
are you talking about using?
You're basically tapping another star.
Oh yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Well, there's a few problems with that. Most likely, you're going to tap the star within your system because the drop off in the energy from a star falls off as the square of the distance from the star. So if you're 4 times further away from the star, the actual level of intensity of the radiation is 16 times smaller. So you want to make a way to utilize as much of that energy you're getting right off the bat. So you'd have to put it somewhere. So could you go to another system, tap off it? Yes. But you'd want to store it in some fashion and then transport it somewhere else to release it to where you want to. I could see that happening. But
could it be stored in solar panels, Mark?
Well, solar panels are great, again, when you're on a planet that's getting hit by the sun, right? So the solar panels are just the receiver. You have to store the energy the solar panels make. For instance, our observatory out in the Arizona desert is fully green. It's got these large 8 by 10 solar panels that follow the sun's light all day long and store that energy for nighttime use in a banks of batteries out there, big giant batteries. Okay, well, those batteries are the storage vessel. The solar panels are just delivering the energy to it. So they would not be the storage mechanism, but they would be the mechanism by which the energy is acquired from the sun. So solar panels wouldn't do it, but the batteries that would store the energy would. So again, if you're going to go to another star and tap that energy, as long as you had an economically efficient, feasible manner to get away from that star to go to where you need to put that energy, you could do it. And what is that manner? Well, Kaluza-Klein gravitons would allow that, because if you have a fusion reactor is all you would need to generate these KK gravitons to allow your ship to be, transported in this manner. So that's the kind of thing that I think would be on the docket for us. And I actually think that's why CERN is investigating them right now, because they see that they're actually pretty interesting. And across the Atlantic in San Francisco, Lawrence Livermore Labs, where the scientist who owns the property our observatory is on, used to be a scientist for 22 years as their chief nuclear guy. This this laboratory was instrumental in creating a sustained fusion reaction for the first time in human history. And it didn't get more energy out than they put in. That's the goal of fusion. However, they did manage to create the sustained reaction. So milestone achieved, because it's running at over 15 million Celsius. That's a very, very high temperature, and nothing on Earth can withstand that. But they managed to contain it for an extended period of time. That was a huge milestone. So little victories, right? So eventually we'll get to the point where we'll be able to do this fusion on a larger scale and probably put in less energy than we get out. And that break-even point where we get the equal amount out as we put in, that's the target now, right? So if Lawrence Livermore is left to their own devices, they will, over some period of time, develop a fusion reactor. And that fusion reactor, developed in San Francisco, could be used over in the CERN research thrust to actually create these gravitons using that fusion reactor to generate the power for the accelerator in your ship. So marry those two technologies together, we're interstellar, folks. And it's not going to happen overnight. We're probably 100 or more years away from that.
Unless we cheat. I do have to make one snarky comment. We'll get the Lawrence Livermore fusion. We'll be making equal amounts, if not more, electricity, and then we'll pump it into a wire grid that loses 38% of its electricity.
Right.
That's why I try to go off the grid as much as possible, and what I got left over, I send down the wire for the rest of you.
I agree with that. That's a fantastic thought process. Yeah. Why?
God, don't even get me started. If you want to see someone
surface grids are suck. Okay.
And why do you have to connect everything to a grid that you're not maintaining, so that when a squirrel decides that it's going to on a wire, the 3/4 of the country goes down at one time?
That's right.
Well, right. You had mentioned earlier about California and the dystopian future we may be looking at. If Gavin Newsom, the current governor of California, gets his way, by 2035, the sale of internal combustion automobiles will be verboten. We'll all have to go to EVs, and then we can watch the entire infrastructure of California disintegrate.
Exactly.
That'll be something fun to watch.
Exactly. Don's absolutely right about that. I've actually done a little research on this, because I talk about electric cars in my book. I also talk about it in lectures, and I can tell you this.
And Mark, what is the title of that book? And is there a special way that people can communicate to you to get like a special endorsement to the book after they purchase it?
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't trying to hawk it. I'm sorry, but
I want people to know about the book.
It's called The Populated Universe, and it's a book that talks about the history of how life formed on Earth and how we're going to go off the planet. And so it's on Amazon, and it's a great book. I enjoyed making it. When I actually got out of the hospital after surgery, I couldn't, I was working on getting my sight back. And while getting my sight back, I finished the book. That was my therapy, to force my eyes to look at the screen. So there were a lot of typos, but I had a great editor, okay, who actually went through the whole book word for word and was able to edit it for me. And she was great.
It's good that you have an editor that did word for word, because I've bumped into a few editors as of late that pretty much go one word per paragraph.
Yeah. But the point being, okay, when we talk about energy, okay, one of the things that I think is very important, and you talk about Dyson spheres, the idea is that we want to actually be able to utilize energy that's happening around us all the time. I actually designed Gulfstream windmills, underwater windmills, large fabric sheets that were moving slowly, very high torque motors being turned by these massive sheets that were, a half a mile long each, 3 of them. And those would generate tons of power for shoreline communities, and it's endless. It never stops moving. Tides never stop moving. And there was I got this idea from a boat landing up in Maine. Okay, Commander was all about Maine. Okay, and in Port Clyde, Maine, as a matter of fact, at the boat dock there, it's a float, and it goes up and down, and the walkway is really steep when the tide is out, and when the tide comes in, it's more level. But up here at the top is where the roller is that goes up and down as the thing moves up and down with the tides every 12 hours. Well, what if you had a high torque motor in there? This motion is going to turn it. And you could attach that to a string of high torque motors, and that float is still going to rise and fall. And you're going to get power out of that. If you did that with every float dock in a commercial package, you'd have a lot of energy for shoreline communities, and the ocean waves. I designed a wave bobber that would make energy. Every time the waves were happening out in the middle of the ocean, this thing would be going up and down, and there's a weight down below. And the weight was set such a weight that it would kind of do this motion. It would lag behind the motion of the float on the surface. And every time it went up and down like this, it was pulling a little string, okay, because it was attached. And that string was turning a little generator, which was charging a battery. So
right, Mark, let me interrupt you, because I'm fascinated by this, but why hasn't this been looked at?
Exactly. There are companies,
because you're explaining something that sounds like it's very efficient.
Yeah.
But here we're trying to get windmills above the water out, because they say now that it's killing whales and sea life. So if you want to put something under the water, how much resistance from environmental groups are you going to get for something like that?
Actually,
it's not very efficient.
It's gonna, the giant windmills are the things that they worry about the most. So one of the things I talked about but could not prove, because nothing could be built, was these windmill vanes are flexible. So a whale could swim right through it and go right through it, and it wouldn't even know it hit it. It would just see fabric and it would go by. Okay, because they're small vanes, but the whale would not stop it. A submarine could go through it and not even, and just hear it going down the hull. Like, oops, we went through one of those windmills, and that would be it. It would come back to its shape and restore and start to go again. So why hasn't it been expanded? Well, there are companies building wave bobbers. There's many different designs, in fact, and I'm a big fan of wave power because it never stops. It's always happening. It's wind driven. It's driven by the rotation of the earth. Currents are always present, and I think that this is just an untapped resource. I always have felt that. Solar, of course, yes.
I wanted to ask you this before you go on into the solar part. As you know, years back, I did a lot of marine mammal survey flights for New England Aquarium and some other entities. And the primary source of money to do the whale, mainly the right whale studies, was the offshore permitting to put barges and other things to put offshore windmills, which to me seems completely screwed up. I'll keep it family clean here for that. But it did generate us to go out there and look at it. And I remember making the remark about the wave performance. And one of my marine biologists in-flight observers. We carried scientists for the validation of what we were seeing.
Yeah.
Said, well, that takes a lot of energy out of the water. And you can't, when you remove that kind of energy, you're removing a lot of energy out of the water. And I felt like maybe it wasn't time at 1,000 feet and 120 knots to get into what I consider a high school level discussion of physics about destruction and creation of energy and form changing. And I said, I let it go, but I heard this remark. We have about 2 minutes left. Give me a quick take on the taking all this energy out of the water, how that's a bad thing. Because I don't see it.
Okay, when he's talking about taking the energy out of the water, he's talking about taking the momentum of the water striking the surfaces. Have you seen how many aircraft are flying in the air at any one time?
Correct.
Several thousand.
Right.
Okay. Have you seen how many ships are on the ocean at any one time? Many more thousands. So as the ships are traveling on the surface of the water, they're also taking a little bit of momentum away. They're fighting currents. Their bulk is cutting into the water. They have drafts that cut through the water and take some of that momentum of a current away. So the point I'm trying to make is that I don't believe that anything we can do regarding wave action and wave tapping would ever take away enough energy to halt anything like a Gulf Stream or change the nature of wind-blown currents unless it was done on an absolutely astronomical scale. And you don't need to do that. You don't need to cover the ocean with black solar balls, to get a benefit. You don't need to do that. So I think that we can efficiently do this, and I don't buy that stealing energy out of the water is going to have any detrimental effects at all.
Well, I always thought a nice one would be maybe slow down some of the erosion in some of the communities too, but that's a different story for a different night.
For shorelines,
and ladies and gentlemen in the audience, we're at our break. We're going to come back on the other side. We're going to start out with a quick video, and then we're going to talk about Don Ecker's latest paper about the DOS-based CIA information line. And let's talk about the CIA and UAPs in the last couple of weeks. UAP Crossfire, KGRA DB. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to UAP Crossfire on KGRA Radio DB. My guest hosts, Chris DeFrano, Mark D'Antonio, and Don Ecker, Commander Cobra, here with you. It's been an interesting talk. I know we've kind of heavy on the science part of it. I want to delve back into some of what I consider. I have a little thesis I'm going to put forward on you gentlemen in a little bit, driving towards that on the final kind of question for this week. Don, you sent me a paper, I think about 4 weeks ago, about your adventures, one of your many adventures in this researching and cataloging and historical analysis of the UAP phenomenon. And it dealt with the CIA, and you had a very interesting vignette where you were talking about the database that the CIA had created. Take us down that lane, because it's I think, an incredible story.
Well, it wasn't the CIA that created it. As a matter of fact, they hated it.
I believe it was a CIA-related agent, wasn't it?
A retired agent, somebody that had joined the agency in 1952, retired in 1977, was decorated, and by the time he retired, his name was Ralph McGehee. He became totally disillusioned with the agency. A lot of machinations were going on. As a matter of fact, McGehee said that they were no longer, in his opinion, an intelligence agency, but a foreign policy group run from the president's office. Now, of course, we're talking at that time about primarily, in the latter 60s, Richard Nixon. Then we're talking about Gerald Ford. And when he left, Jimmy Carter had just taken office. So what he did, now remember, by this time, computer systems were becoming much more prevalent. Personal, I'm talking about personal computer citizens. And he began putting together a database primarily all about what the CIA had been doing, was doing, and etc. from open sources. Nothing classified was in there whatsoever. And CIA base, I read about it sometime in the very early 1990s. And at that time, I was working with a television producer at UFO Magazine. He was trying to get UFO Magazine on the air, the type of stories and people we were interfacing with and so forth. And he had another project he was doing, and I mentioned McGehee to him. And McGehee was then living in Virginia, McLean, Virginia, as a matter of fact. Contacted, he flew out here, and we did this television project with him. Now, him and I got to know each other. He had spent several tours in Southeast Asia, primarily Vietnam. I told him about my experiences, what I did in the military in Vietnam, and we became rather friendly. So I asked him, I said, you know, Ralph, I'd love to get you on my radio show. And we ended up doing a couple of interviews, and I wrote extensively about him and CIA base in the pages of UFO Magazine. So he gave me a copy of it. Now, in those days, computers were either on the Apple platform or IBM type systems that were MS-DOS, Microsoft DOS. Well, it's so different than what we have today. And but I went through this database, and it was extensive at the time. And I asked him, I said, Ralph, I said, you know, I've gone through here, and whether you may or may not be aware of it, the CIA had extensive input and machinations with the UFO phenomenon. And I began sending him some stuff like information on the Robertson panel, 1953, and a lot of other stuff. Well, he looked at it, and he began including it into CIA base. Now, as time went along, I kind of lost contact with Ralph. And of course, there were so many other things going on at the time. And it wasn't until several months ago, my wife was in the midst of a frenzy of spring cleaning, and she began bringing me a bunch of stuff out. And she said, what are you going to do with this? I think you ought to get rid of it. Well, some of it just so happened to be some floppy disks from that period of time.
Wow.
These 3.5-inch floppy disks that were either 750K or 1.4 megabytes in style. Well, I had no way to read them. So I did a little research and discovered that I could buy an external USB ported drive to read those discs. Well, I did. And I began going through it, and my God, I was shocked at the stuff that I had in there. But one of the first things I came across were several inputs from CIA base. And I got thinking about that, and I said, wow, yeah, that was something else. So I went online, and unfortunately, McGehee, who passed away in 2019, never ported it over to the Windows system. Okay, it stayed MS-DOS, but there is a couple of places on the web where the entire database is in PDF form, and you can go in there. If you have it, it's free. I mean, you can download it, and you can put search terms in there in the PDF thing, and it will work from that aspect. But of course, it hasn't been updated in years. But the information in there up to that point drove the CIA crazy, okay? And they began harassing McGehee, one of their own, or one of their formerly their own. And he became one of their biggest critics. As a matter of fact, he wrote a book, which you can find online. It's the last one I saw listed was very expensive, but the book is titled Deadly Deceits, My 25 Years in the CIA by Ralph McGehee. And in there, he goes into great detail on what he witnessed. And he had to go to court in order to force them to allow him to publish. And incidentally, once again, this was all from open sources, nothing classified in there, because had he have tried to stick classified information in there, he would have been susceptible to federal prosecution. So at any rate, yeah, this is something that is sorely missed today, especially in today's climate.
Absolutely.
Something like this would be invaluable.
Chris, can you run that? Can you bring up the video that talks about the CIA please?
We've established in history and documents through the Freedom of Information Act, the CIA and the military complex as a whole has really aimed to essentially mislead the public when it comes to UFOs, tell them something that necessarily is not the truth. We've seen it time and time again through the decades, over and over and over.
So, Mark.
Yes, sir.
Do you think that the CIA could possibly be involved in the suppression of information? I mean, their charter is to be working intelligence overseas. They wouldn't have anything going on domestically, would they?
Of course they would. I'll give you an example. I was involved in a program working on a special weapon system, because I do special projects for the Navy. Many people know that. I've been very clear about that. And one of them was being tested out in a lake in Bayview, Idaho. And someone at the other end of the lake saw this thing flying around in the sky and got in their car and drove down, looked at it in the sky and said, "Whoa, what is that? It looked like a UFO. It really does." And they took pictures of it. Well, as MUFON's chief photo and video analyst, guess who got the pictures? Okay, I knew exactly what it was.
Inside job.
I knew exactly what it was. I couldn't tell them, but I called the program office down in Washington. You can actually see what this thing looks like because it says it's been canceled, and it's called Project Cormorant, like the bird, Cormorant. It's on Wikipedia. You can see it. It says it was canceled. All that really means is that it was removed from the charging agency to a different charging agency. So as far as that agency is concerned, it's been canceled, see? But it hasn't been canceled. It's out there. Imagine a device that leaves a missile tube in the sub, comes to the surface, spreads its wings, flies off, does a mission, comes back, lands on the water, closes up its wings, and navigates itself back into the missile tube and goes home. It's literally the flying sub from Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea with a few caveats, okay? So we were developing that, and I was doing the engineering models for the program. So I called the program office, and I said, "Hey, there's photos I have here," and we called it the birdie affectionately. I said, of the birdie, and I said, "What do you want me to do with these? I'm really on the side of these folks taking the pictures. I want to kind of let them know the truth." I said, "They think they're UFOs," and the guy laughed, and he said, "Let them think that. That's great for us." And I said, "No, let me tell you what that means. What it means is tomorrow he's going to come back with 10 of his friends, and they're all going to start taking pictures of the birdie. And one of them is going to eventually take a picture of it doing something you don't want them to see." And so he went quiet, and he says, "Well, what do you want?" I said, a statement saying it's ours. That's all. You don't have to say what it is. Just say that it belongs to us. Okay? This way we can serve the UFO population, the people that want to search for these UFOs, and we can keep the project within the secrecy that it requires. That's my idea, I said. And you always offer it as a question, never tell them anything, right? And he said, okay, I'll bring it up at the meeting and I'll let you know. Well, I got an email with a statement saying it was one of ours. I passed that statement along out in the Lake Pend Oreille area and to the people that sent the pictures, and they all went home because they knew it wasn't ours. But you see what's happening there? There was this push to say, yeah, let them think it's a UFO. What a good idea. No, not a good idea. You're muddying the water intentionally. And so that was an example of a direct influence. That's the only one I've ever done like that, where it got confused as a UFO. And so I was on the side of ufologists trying to get this information out there. So what I did was try to get a statement, which we got. And so everybody was happy on both sides. Well, the ufologists, not so much, because it wasn't UFO. It was one of ours. But still, everything was maintained. No secrets were given away. And everybody got the answers they required. Right? But can they do more than that? Of course. I have friends in the intelligence community now, and there's all kinds of things going on that you just don't know about, you know? I mean,
well, there's a good reason for that. I'm not going to say that there isn't a good reason for that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I'm not even going to fault Mr. DePerno on your other on your stream. I sent you a picture of the cormorant if you want to pop that up.
Of the what?
Cormorant.
Cormorant, yes.
The project that I was talking about.
Yeah, it's in your Skype. It's in your Skype, sir.
It's really a malevolent looking thing, you know.
Well, that's always good. I mean, if it looks bad, you know,
I know.
You feel like you spent taxpayer money the right way. But
it's Independence Day.
Here's my point. There's a lot of intentional cover-up that went on. The 60s, the United States Air Force used the UFO craze and interest as a means to cover a lot of their projects.
Yes, they did.
And I think, and I'm going to say that my belief is that there are folks that are in the know that hybrid that approach to cover up what they were doing in UAP investigation. But it became a very useful tool. The problem with that, when you do that, you don't want to give away capability because you can put people's lives at risk. There you go. There's a good shot of it.
That's it right there. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, I just turned my camera toward. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Anyone feeling nauseous can send a note directly to Mark Antonio after the show for causing illness during the show.
Yes, and don't send me a baggie full of
a guaranteed alien matter.
Right.
Like North Korea sending poop bags into South Korea.
Yeah. Now, boy, I'll tell you right there. This balloon thing never is going to go away. That is worthy of a show one night. Balloons and UFOs.
Oh, yeah.
See what is going on there.
And you got to talk to.
Historical note: the only successful air vehicle to make it to the United States from the Imperial Japanese during World War II was a balloon.
That's right. They were going to use it as a weapon
on the mainland of this country, and their attempt was to start forest fires. But right. I don't want to go. I want to delve into that. That's another show for another night all on its own. Chris, can you bring up the video that you and I and Mr. Ecker were talking about earlier about the person who castigated and caused a lot of angst?
Armand Doty, correct?
Correct.
Oh.
He photographed UFOs. He actually photographed a UFO over Dulce, New Mexico.
But how can I have faith in what you're telling me if I know that you lied to Paul Binowitz?
I didn't lie to Paul Binowitz. I had a job to do. I wasn't a maverick. I just didn't go out and do this on my own. My supervisors told me, listen, we don't want him to go out to the public, go on camera and say, hey, I just tapped into a secret laser on Kirtland Air Force Base. Obviously, we can't have that happen. So all I had to do was say, well, you know what, Paul? Maybe what you did see was UFOs.
Ron, I'm going to start with you, but I'm going to ask you to confine. I'm going to come back to you when I run the horn here. Give some perspective on the gentleman we just saw and the situation.
Well, Richard Doty was formerly AFOSI, Air Force Office Special Investigations, counterintelligence type stuff. And Paul Benowitz, the guy he was talking about, was a civilian scientist that had, incidentally, a very strong interest in UFO activity. You know, I got to tell you, I prefer UFO over UAP. It's just a matter of preference, but the whole UAP thing kind of ticks me off. I've seen the Air Force do this before, change the nomenclature. But at any rate,
you like the fact that when you hear the banner, hear the opening of our show, and see the banner, that you have blood come across your eyes and you're ready for this show. So it does serve a purpose. You know,
yes,
yes. It takes a little poking and prodding to get you fired up. You know, some days when we're talking, you know, you're not angry. You don't have the mojo. But
well, I'm not.
The
no,
UAP
I'm never
thing
angry.
is the checkered flag.
I get passionate, Deuce. I get passionate.
I think we all get passionate. It's just what motivates us.
But at any rate, Benowitz was a civilian scientist, had some contract jobs where he was doing some work for Kirtland Air Force Base, for the Air Force. And he literally could get up on the roof of his house, look across and see the base. And this is where he saw some very strange, unusual things. And somewhere along the line, he became convinced this may be alien activity. Well, he began creating a ruckus. He began contacting federal senators, congressmen, telling them about this, began raising a fuss. And one of the people that was involved with Benowitz was civilian UFO researcher William Moore. Now, Moore is another study in disinformation. At the time, he was one of the premier civilian UFO investigators. He was a researcher and investigator for the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO. Okay. He dealt with people in the Mutual UFO Network. I mean, the guy was big because, for one thing, he was the author that wrote the very first book, along with another co-author, on the Roswell incident. Okay. Right. And when Roswell began making the rounds, if you will, in the mid to latter 80s, it became a huge case. Moore, who knew Benowitz, was working in tandem with Richard Doty. And Doty told Moore that the Air Force had tried to get Benowitz to shut his mouth, and he wouldn't do it. So somebody up the chain of command decided, and I might add, totally illegally, to mount a disinformation campaign against Paul Benowitz. More because, as he later told me, and I knew Moore pretty well, he later told me he was bound and determined to get to the center of the beehive of UFO secrecy. And he thought at the time, the guy was an arrogant man, very arrogant. He always saw himself as the smartest cat in the room, okay? And he thought that he could handle these intelligence guys. And they offered him money. Now, he was very very direct about this. He never took a nickel from any of them. So he could never have been said to be a paid asset, if you will. But he agreed to go along. Doty approached him, and one of the things they did was fabricate a document that they gave Doty. Or I'm sorry, they gave Paul Benowitz. And Moore said he held on to it for a time. This is what he told me. Before he finally, because he was getting some pressure, he claimed, to present this to Benowitz. Now, in an effort to excuse himself, and I'm talking about Bill Moore, he said to me, he said, well, I caution Paul to not accept anything at face value. Now, I got to add this because there are a hell of a lot of people out there that may not have even been born during this period of time.
Oh, I wish I could be in that category.
Yeah, a lot of UFO huge incidents were happening then. There was, of course, the Bentwaters UFO incursion over an Air Force tactical nuclear base in the United Kingdom. And there was a lot of fear going on then, too, because back in 1980, the Russians invaded Afghanistan. Poland began resisting Soviet occupation. They wanted to get the communists the hell out of there. Lech Walesa, you may or may not remember that name, later became...
We're all old enough to remember Mr. Walesa.
Later became the president of Poland, but he was leading the resistance with the trade unionists against Soviet influence and Soviet occupation. The fear was that the Russians may do to Poland what they did to Hungary in 1956. In other words, send in the tanks to crush this rebellion. Fortunately, that never happened. But Bentwaters had tactical nukes because they were afraid that if, things got out of hand, the Russians may say, the hell with it, we're already in Afghanistan, let's go into Western Europe, and then things would have gone bad in a flash. Well, a CNN reporter by the name of Chuck DeCaro actually got that story on CNN. Now, back in those days, CNN was still a functioning news source. But then something else happened. Japan Airlines. And then Bill Moore and Jamie Chandra came out with the MJ-12 documents.
Right.
Now, that's a story in itself.
Absolutely.
Okay. These were documents purportedly were created for incoming President Dwight D. Eisenhower when he took office from Harry Truman. And it was at that time in the early 50s, UFOs were everywhere, including the skies of Washington, D.C. But all this stuff was coming together in a perfect storm. Benowitz became convinced that an alien base, was underground in the Archuleta Mesa. In other words, an alien presence underground in connection with U.S. military personnel. Benowitz began to hyperventilate, He wrote some papers that today are collectively known as Project Beta. He was convinced the aliens were going to invade the Earth. And along with this paper, they kept increasingly putting pressure on Paul Benowitz. Now, this I can't verify. I could not swear to in court. But I used to meet Moore every 4 or 6 weeks after the infamous 1989 MUFON International Symposium. And that, my friends, is another story, where Bill Moore, among other things, admitted to working hand in glove with the American intelligence establishment, which effectively destroyed his UFO career. And I could go on and on about that, but that's not what this is about. Benowitz, they targeted him, the Air Force, to the point where, according to Bill Moore, they paid black budget contractors to break into his house when he wasn't there and do things, chicken shit things, like rearrange his furniture. And Benowitz got to the point where he was so paranoid, okay, that he had firearms stashed in practically every corner of his house, convinced that somebody was coming to get him. Now, this is where I blew up at Moore. On one of these brunches we were having, Moore told me that one of these meetings he had with Paul Benowitz, in a 45-minute period, Moore timed it, Paul lit up and put out 28 cigarettes. That's almost 1.5 packs, 20 cigarettes to a pack, almost 1.5 packs that he was smoking in 45 minutes. The man had a mental breakdown.
Absolutely.
He had to be institutionalized. And Doty, that son of a bitch, was one of the people that was responsible for this. And nobody ever paid a price for what they did to that man. They effectively ended his life. He died still in psychiatric care. It was unconscionable. And it's something I've never forgotten.
So, Mark, give me your take on it before we go to Chris.
Well, first of all, my take is that, if Richard Doty is asked to speak anywhere and I'm asked to speak in the same place, I won't do it, because I also feel the same way. It's unconscionable that someone can say, I didn't lie to Paul Benowitz, I was following orders. Well, if following orders means you were lying to someone, then you were lying to someone. So just stand up and admit it, and whatever happens. Chips will fall where they may. So I have no respect for Doty, and ever since hearing about him, he's come up to me at conferences trying to talk to me, and I'll be polite and talk to him, but I'll tell him I don't agree with what you did to Benowitz. And he always sticks to the line, well, I was just doing my job. If your job was to kill a child, would you do that too? Probably would have, if that's what he was told to do. So I don't have any.
What's the benefit of Mr. Doty hanging out? Is this a redemption?
Well, one thing, Deuce, one thing before you go on. Doty was removed from AFOSI. That's the big question. Why? Why was he fired out of AFOSI? He finished his Air Force career in food services. Okay? So somewhere along the line, Doty screwed the pooch in a big way.
Well,
he may have throw that out.
He may have ended up at the short end of the stick for what he did. He may have exceeded his authority. He may have been the fall guy. His removal might be what someone thinks was the payback for Mr. Benowitz's situation. I can give you some pretty plausible reasons.
Well, so could I, but yeah,
But it is interesting and telling that he was removed from those duties. Was he officially removed, or was he put into an undercover kind of role? There's a lot that can be talked about in that spot. Chris, give me your take on this, because you tend to take a very spiritual kind of connection to these kinds of situations. Not that Don and Mark don't have a high empathy meter, but you tend
I don't
to
think
have
we go spiritual on this one. I think Doty should be in jail. That's my humble opinion. Here's a couple of things that I take from Doty. One, he throws his bosses under the bus. He should have kept his mouth shut, period. If he was ordered to do something, they probably told him, keep your mouth shut, which he didn't do. That's number one. Number two, He had no authority to go in, tamper with this guy's computer, change around and stuff like that. You don't work that way. I mean, if you get they could have easily solved this whole problem by getting a search warrant. This is a national security issue. There's a search warrant. Go in there, confiscate his stuff, say, this is a national security thing. We can't talk to you about it. But listen, have a nice life. And that's the way you have to handle something like that. But they wanted to create a scenario and a topic by doing what he did. Now, that's number one. And he hadn't, I don't care what Doty says. I think he, just like the commentator said on the video, he's a liar. How do you believe anything that comes out of his mouth? He's a liar. That's number one. Number two, I kind of blame the government, because if you're going to have a top secret project, you don't put it next to residential homes where people can start filming everything. It's not their fault if they're on their land and they see something flying, or a laser or whatever it was, and they take pictures of it and they believe it's a UFO and they send it to a public forum like MUFON or whatever. Whose fault is that? Is that the government's fault or this guy's fault? And they don't take a view, like Mark said, say, hey, listen, this is one of ours. Don't talk about it. But, it's a national security thing. We're not going to tell you what it is, but it's one of ours. Have a nice life. And so Doty, I think, exceeded his authority. But I think in the ufology field, they're all exceeding their authorities in some respect, because if you listen to what David Grush says, and if you don't mind, Commander, I really want to play that David Grush thing, because I want you to hear what he says about.
Yeah, I want you to segue into that. It's the last one on my list that we had to get to tonight, but I want to throw one thing in. So finish your thread.
Well,
on this.
I'm just saying that all through the ufology field, we're now seeing a trend where people are coming out and saying, yeah, I've been harmed. I've been threatened. I've been, coerced. I've been fouled, and things have happened. And I think somebody who's pulling the strings on this just are not wrapped too tight. I'm sorry, that's it. Because there's a lot of better ways to handle this type of situation. So, yeah, Benovitz, he was a victim, and I think the OSI overseeded what they did. They should have handled it in a different way. It was corrupted. And then Doty, I don't believe anything that comes out of his mouth. I mean, he's trying to throw people under the bus now. He's the one that did it. You're responsible. If you don't think it's right, you go back to your superiors and go, unless you give me a written order, I'm not doing it. A good, solid agent would have done that and says, I think you're exceeding your authority or having me exceed authority. Put it in writing, and I'll get it, and then I'll carry on your order. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay, so let me just give you a quick take. I am not very well versed in this. I do know from you three and others the great distaste that Mr. Doty puts into your mouths. I don't have any connection with him. But there's a couple things that came up when you were setting me up for this this topic that I looked at. One thing is, I believe that Mr. Doty may have been working in a different realm. He may have had a OSI badge and position, but he may have been brought into another sphere of, I hate to use the word intelligence, but intelligence, national security work. What's that line from Point Gross Blank? A certain moral flexibility is sometimes those people are sought out for the roles that they're brought into. There's an interesting part, though, that goes on here. The things that you see happening here, the reason, Chris, that you didn't get the paperwork on this is because things like the Freedom of Information Act were just starting to take form. We're approaching that era. Things are starting to go on to a database that the government doesn't easily control, the internet. And you're looking at the end of the Cold War, and a lot of stuff that was going on for the Cold War was now in question. You have people fighting for budgets, you have people fighting for position, and the techniques that are outlined here were very popular through the 40s, 50s, and 60s. If you got wind of the Manhattan Project and you were part of someone and you weren't part of that project, you were going to be put into a mental institution. Those papers exist. That procedure exists. The reason why you would torture someone like this and drive them into insane, probably with a psychologist doing a profile to say this is the vulnerabilities that this person has, is that it doesn't have a paper trail. That's the reason why people aren't going to get warrants and letters of marque that allow them to do this, because once you put it on paper, there is a chance that someone's going to see it and show it.
I don't disagree with you, but I will say this. Once you step over that line, I agree with what you say. Once you step over that line, they got no choice but to continue what they're doing. And they're just going down the wrong path.
Which leaves me with the last part, Chris. Is Doty still working on that? Is he still doing the same work today? I'll leave it as a Socratic question. It doesn't really need an answer. Let's roll to the Grouch, because I think it's a really good segue into this portion. Please.
At one point, you had said that there has been harmful activity or aggressive activity. Has any of the activity been aggressive, been hostile in your reports?
I know of multiple colleagues of mine that got physically injured, and the activity. And I got
by UAPs or by people within the federal government?
Both.
Okay, so there has been activity by alien or non-human technology and or beings that has caused harm to humans.
I can't get into the specifics in an open environment, but at least the activity that I personally witnessed, and I have to be very careful here because they tell you never to acknowledge tradecraft, right? So what I personally witnessed myself and my wife was very disturbing.
Interesting. What are the two things I take away from that? One, when he said people were getting harmed, he said both. It wasn't just aliens. So that means somebody in the government's still doing stupid things. That's number one.
Would you put a third element to that there may be a league between ETs and the government to allow that kind of stuff?
Maybe. But also the other thing is when he said what I witnessed and my wife.
Yeah, I find that one that just doesn't fit. I have listened to that at least a dozen times, and I don't get that statement.
Well, it doesn't work for me either. Excuse me, especially because he said in that testimony that before he was coming to Congress and before he took this role, he hadn't known anything about UFOs. So I'm not sure why he said he knew stuff about UFOs before by implying that he and his wife saw stuff. Excuse me. So it's weird for me. I mean, I listened to him on Tucker Carlson, and he was very good.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. Excuse me, because Tucker actually asked some really good questions, and he had some good answers. You know, actually, that was better than the congressional testimony, in my view. You know, but he definitely. I feel this is what I feel. I feel that since he had a passing interest in this, without any direct knowledge of it, he was tapped to be the guy to disseminate it. And he said, "Ooh, cool! I can do no wrong." I think that's why he always looked giddy in his testimony, smiling, because he knows he's not doing anything wrong. He's being told what to say. You can say these things, you can't say this stuff. Okay? And that's what I think is going on. And I also think that he had to do his own research to figure out what was real and what wasn't, because he didn't know all the details. So that became a point where he was also subject to rumor and speculation and possibly not stories that have any true foundations behind them. You know, so I think when he says that, yes, we have craft and we have bodies, is he saying that from a personal experience, or is he saying that from the stuff he's read?
Reliable sources, documents
exactly.
that he has.
And what are those documents? A book written by someone, a YouTube video? I mean, typically you wouldn't expect that of someone in this arena. However, I remind you of when Paul Hellyer was the keynote speaker at the MUFON conference. I was in the front row. I wanted to hear Paul Hellyer, defense minister for Canada. Okay. And he came up and he was picked because of his interest in UFOs. The first statement out of the box that he said, I wanted to get up and leave. He said, I want to start off by saying that everything I ever knew about, or everything I know about UFOs, I found out from reading books like Project Serpo and he named books. Okay, so you're not repeating any personal information. And he said, I have never experienced a UFO or never had any knowledge of them during my time as defense minister. Okay, so my next thought in my head was, why am I here? Why is he here? This is a name with a title. This isn't someone that's had experience. So in Grush's case, he had claimed some experiences, but also claimed in that same testimony, somewhere in there, that he didn't really have a whole lot of knowledge about UFOs prior. So I'm not sure what's what here, to be fair.
Okay, Chris, go cue up the Canadian Defense Minister, please. And then I have a quick comment before I turn it all back to you, because I want to give you an impression. I know
an international television news broadcast. Former Canadian Minister of National Defense, Paul Hellyer, makes an astonishing statement. He claims to have knowledge that extraterrestrials are visiting Earth.
Why do you say that UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying over our heads?
Well, because I know that they are. And they've been visiting this planet for thousands of years. And there is what is called a federation of these people, and they have rules.
The interview sent shockwaves through the media. Viewers questioned why a high-level official would make such an announcement.
That gave me the dubious distinction of being the first person of cabinet rank in the G8 group of countries who ever said categorically, without reservation, UFOs are real, and you have to accept them as being real.
Okay. Now, hold on. Now you know, audience, why we have the mutants on there, because we have, and second thing I have to say, Don Ecker was the epitome of placid waters, and Mark D'Antonio was a wave generating electricity over there. It was incredible. So, listen, I want to put something in there. Very interesting thing he says. I hold the same opinion on his so-called statements and testimony, but there's a common thread that comes up. It really upset a couple weeks back some of the folks in the audience when I said the Navy admiral that was talking used a set of terms where he said the Navy, and it was talking about the secure SIPR net on there. And it threw me off, because all the other things we were saying made sense, and many, many years and still using SIPR net in my day job, I've never heard people refer to it by the service SIPR net. It's just the SIPR net. It's like, that's just how it is. It was an unusual statement. Grouse talking about his wife in there and some of the other things he says. This gentleman making the remark that he's a cabinet level, the first cabinet level person, okay, to come out from the G8. Why, in this particular case, do you have to personify it? How important? What kind of flag planting is going on here? And I'm starting to wonder if it's just to throw people like me off, to put that, I guess they call it in movies now, you kids are calling it the Easter egg, where there's something in there in the movie that doesn't fit, that people like me will go crazy. Like we just had a really fun run on one of the original Star Wars. There's a scene where the Imperial Star Trooper is running, and it's obvious in the costume. They couldn't see very well because the guy runs right into like a doorway beam, and they left it in the movie. His head snaps back, and it has, for anybody who's ever stacked up and gone into a room or done anything like that, you just can't help but laugh if you catch it. The singer did Margaritaville. Help me.
Jimmy
Buffett. Jimmy Buffett in the Jurassic Park movies, his 13 Seconds of Fame, He's got the 2 drinks. It's a great scene. While everybody's screaming and running while the dinosaurs are getting ready to eat everybody, he picks up his 2 drinks and runs with his 2 drinks and Easter eggs. Are these folks putting out Easter eggs to me on that? All right. Mark, you've been absolutely the epitome of calmness.
I've been trying.
Go ahead and react to that clip.
Okay, I can tell you this. Okay. That's an example, I think, of someone who just wants to make himself relevant. I know he's dead now, so rest his soul. However, I will say that when he was at MUFON as the keynote speaker, he said the words, "Everything I ever learned about UFOs, I read from books." That's it. He said, "I never experienced UFOs. I never had a single case come across my desk while I was defense minister for Canada." And now on that newscast, he talks like, "I know they're here because I believe the books." That's the thing. He's believing someone else's words. He's not believing his experience. He's believing his experience of reading a book. Okay. So I felt that Hellier was being disingenuous, probably because he wanted to gain some relevancy again, maybe. I hate to say it that way. That's kind of harsh, but.
But Mark, do you think Grush is disingenuous also?
No, see, that's the thing. I think that Grush is like Hellier believes the things that he read about, but I also think that Grush noted in particular that he has colleagues that have had experiences. So Grush is a different character. See, whereas Hellier had no experiences while defense minister, Grush has had experiences relayed to him from colleagues. And he also had to do his own research as well. So there's a mix of what could be false and true data in there. And even Grush doesn't know which is which, but he's the guy that was picked to say it. And I think we should consider that everything Grush says may just be stuff that he's assuming based on what he's read, you know. And so that's my personal feeling about Grush. I tend to think that he is speaking truthfully, as was Hellier. And Hellier, to his credit, said right up front that all he ever knew about UFOs he learned from books. Okay. Grush didn't say, "I was selected by my superiors to learn about this topic and then deliver a treatise on the subject, okay, to everybody in Congress." I mean, he didn't say that, but I think that's how that turned out. I don't think he...
Did Carl Nell endorse him and Admiral Tim Ganault? I mean, Carl Nell said, "Hey, he's the real thing. He knows."
Yeah, I agree that like I said, he's a mix, I think, of stories that he believes from his research and some actual data that he really knows. I think it's a mix.
I got to say
please,
something
take
about
us towards
Grush.
the end of the show. I warn everybody we have about 6-7 minutes left.
Grush, in my book, okay, is legitimate. He's the real thing. And it shows us something if you know what to look for. There is a dichotomy within government, is my opinion, okay, where you have one group, whomever they are, want to release information. And on the other side, you have that other group that wants to keep this tightly compartmentalized until they die. Now, what has happened that convinces me of that? Well, obviously, Grush was given the pass, go collect your $200, go into Congress, testify. This is what my colleagues told me. And he was very careful to say secondhand, third hand. He had no firsthand information. But my colleagues that I know, that I trust, that I believe in, this is what they said. I'm now telling you. And what happened with Grush? He was targeted.
He was, yeah.
By this other group. They started doing things like releasing his medical files. Federal violation right there.
Right.
Okay, federal violation. Is anybody following up on that? Is there an investigation about that? The guy apparently is on the spectrum. He may have a touch of Asperger's. He talked about that. He admitted to that.
Yeah, he was honest about that.
He was very honest about that.
But a successful Air Force officer. I've served, and I'm pretty sure I'm on the spectrum. If you ask most people, they'll tell you someplace over the rainbow, but that's a different story.
That's only because of your glasses.
And as far as his wife, it's my understanding that there was some type of harassment that was going on. Hey, look, I've said this before. Back in the early 90s at UFO Magazine, we got involved with somebody that purported, and this guy had information. Okay. A lot of stuff that at the time nobody knew about, but he came on my radio show. He was connected, became very close friends with my friend, Richard Saraday. They came down. I interviewed both of them. He was in the magazine, in UFO Magazine, and suddenly we have strange people in vans staking us out. I told you one morning when Richard came out, we were working on some TV things. Richard came out and he said, hey, you know, there's a van right down the street. And I said, yeah, I know. He said, well, there's two guys just sitting in there. I said, yeah, they've been here for a while. I said, you know what? I'm going to go out and offer them some coffee. I got some coffee and a couple of cups. I went out walking right toward the van and they took off. Now, harassment? Yeah, I think you could say legitimately that was harassment. Who the hell were they? I don't know. But we were surveilled down at the radio studio one night. Well, it's a long story, but one night they had us staked out down there when we were going in to the studios with our guest and what have you. And by the way, they were confronted and the guy took off. He was incidentally a private investigator. The guy that was surveilling us was a private investigator. I heard later through the grapevine that he might have been hired by Lockheed. Now, Lockheed.
Okay, Don.
Oh my God.
We're running towards the end of the show. We got about 3 minutes. I don't want to cut us. I don't want to cut you off the story. I want the audience to hear the Lockheed. So let's make sure we bring that in for the next show.
All right.
But on what you're talking about is, do you think that visible harassment like that, visible tailing like that, is just the ability to send you a warning shot? Because I mean, really, if they're going to start to get into your shorts, right? If they're going to really cause problems, they're not going to be easily seen, right?
Right.
No.
This is the first tier of that activity. Did you think anything else had ever gone on? I remember you saying that you thought some other stuff wasn't quite copacetic.
Look, I was the wrong guy to try to intimidate. Okay.
I think so now.
That's puppy shit. Okay, to me. All right, puppy shit. Which I mean, it's smelly, yeah, but it's runny and yellow, but no, I would have to go back, Deuce, because we're talking about 36 years worth. All right, I'd have to do some thinking about that. But yeah, we've had things happen at the offices.
My suggestion to you, sir, it would make an interesting treatment for one of your papers. Just to trace through that. Chris.
I just want to say,
we got a minute.
Grush, and I want to ask you all this real quick. He involved his wife. He brought his wife up. I mean, that's a significant thing. He says what me and my wife witnessed. I mean, to me, that's significant. It's very significant because he's now accompanying his wife into what's going on.
Mark, and it makes no sense to me unless she was also in uniform and she had a role in this. It doesn't make any sense to me to do that.
For a guy with White House clearance, Mark, why would he say something like that?
There's a lot of people that are in prison that had White House clearance. I know that sounds fascinating to the audience when you hear that. I spent some time in the Eisenhower building. went over to the West Wing, the whole 9 yards. I get all that. I understand that seems to have some real power, but it comes with other attachments to it. My point is, I think there's things that come up in there that throw me off on this discussion. Folks, we're at the end. I am so sorry. Mark D'Antonio, Don Ecker, Chris DePrano. We're having fun when we don't know where the time went, sort of like a Dyson sphere. We're back. We went to Pluto, we had a drink, and we're back. That's what it's all about, folks.
Enjoy your Kaluza Klein gravitons.
And look for us next week. And until then, God bless.